This morning's scripture passage comes from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 9, verses 2 through 9. Hear this good news. After 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John with him and led them up a high mountain where they were all alone. There he was transfigured before them. His clothes became dazzling white, whiter than anyone in the world could bleach them. And there appeared before them Elijah and Moses, who were talking with Jesus. And Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not know what to say because they were so frightened. Then a cloud appeared and covered them, and a voice came from the cloud. "This is my son, whom I love. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, they no longer saw anyone with them except Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus gave them orders not to tell anyone what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. I have found it interesting and fascinating for these last 3 weeks that the scripture passages seem to be all leading in the same direction. And I've also found it fascinating that these passages, which I have preached from a gazillion times, each of the last 3 Sundays have led me to a place like no place I've ever been before. I'm going to review just a little bit. 2 weeks ago, I preached a sermon about Jesus' authority. And why was it that people responded to him so profoundly? And I just shared with you that Jesus did not teach and preach about what others said about what others said, but rather Jesus preached from his own mind, his own heart, his own soul. He preached from his intuitive self and his conscious self connected with the divine. And whenever you come from a place of total authenticity, it's much more powerful than wherever you come from a place that you're just talking about what somebody else said about something else. But another thing that we looked in that passage was when Jesus was casting out the demon, that the demon asked Jesus, "What do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth?" And we explored some about what does Jesus want? And what I was able to conclude in my own reflection was Jesus wants us to be whole and complete and healed. That's what he wants. And then last week, we looked at some more about that's like the next step of that theme of the week previously, that we looked at solitude and prayer and also the act of embracing our shadow self. And when I use the word demon, as I've shared with you many times, I'm not talking about some evil spirit from the netherworld that has occupied your mind and body. But demon, in my mind and my experience, is that in our soul and our spirit which has been wounded. And oftentimes when our spirit, our soul, our psyche is wounded, we often discover tools to medicate ourselves or to cover it up or to somehow find a way not to trip over the big lump in the rug that we've swept all the hurt underneath, right? And we have a phrase in our own vernacular, so I have to face my what? I have to face my demons. And what I tried to convey to you last week was that what if those demons that we are afraid of, that we try to suppress, were not our enemy, but were a part of us crying out that we need help in healing. And then I also shared with you some about Jungian psychology and dream work, that it is our shadow self that's chasing us through the trenches of a war scene. But our shadow self is that part of us that we're ashamed of, that we want to somehow keep in the basement of the house. We don't want it to emerge because we're ashamed of it. It embarrasses us. We don't even want to acknowledge that it's a part of us. In our dreams, it's our shadow that chases us. In our dreams, it's the shadow that's haunting us. But our shadows are not our enemy. They're not seeking to destroy us, but rather to wake us up that we need to get help and healing. And our shadow self also becomes our spiritual guide. Oh, can't I just take a pill and make it all go away? Can't you just say a prayer that just makes it all go away? The next chapter is the Transfiguration story. And I want to say to you right now that transfiguration is extremely hard work. You're just not going to wake up one day and get transfigured. And in fact, I believe it is our incarnations, our life on this earth, that is the process for each of us, our soul, that eternal part of us, to be able to grow stronger and to become more enlightened and to become transfigured. If you want to be transfigured, then you have to be totally committed to a life of aliveness. And I don't know if that's a word, but it seems to fit in this case, aliveness. And in order to live a life of aliveness, we must be able to transfigure. We must be able to transcend just our ego, mind, and our five senses and our carbon, bodies and life on this earth and all the chaos and craziness around us, that we also live in this sense of we are also eternal and there's something deep and beautiful and powerful within us. And even in the midst of the chaos, we can hear the still small voice. And we can answer the question that God asked Elijah at the mouth of the cave. What are you doing here? Aliveness, a life of aliveness, requires total and complete commitment. If we choose not to take that route, then what we do is we set ourselves up to be saints of mediocrity. How do we become transfigured? I think this passage gives us some clues, and that's what I want to do with you today, is explore those clues. First, I want to give you a little background on the passage. It says that Jesus took Peter, James, and John, the three amigos, his favorite of the three disciples, and he led them up on a high mountain. And it was on a mountaintop that they had this otherworldly life experience. The use of the mountain was a common motif and theme in all of Hebrew literature and in their theology and in their ideology, that you receive your greatest revelation on top of a mountain. It was on Mount Sinai that Moses received God's words about the Ten Commandments. Last week we explored Elijah, and when he was on top of a mountain, in a cave in the mountain, that is where he discovered the still small voice of God. And then that still small voice rang loudly in his ear when he asked him, "What are you doing here?" Right? So the idea that this transfiguration experience for Jesus and the disciples who witnessed it took place on top of a mountain would have been a very common theme for those who were listening to this story. Then it goes on to describe that something happened to Jesus, that he became transfigured, that he and his clothing became this brightest light, that there was no bleach that a human being could make to make it whiter than what they saw in this light that was just coming from Jesus' body. And then there was Elijah and Moses and their light all joining together. What is this? And I believe what it is, from where I am today in my own journey, that who we really are is energy. Energy that lives within a carbon life form and this body and flesh. But who we really are, our eternal self, is energy, pure energy. So it was Jesus' energy communing with the energy of Elijah and Moses. Elijah and Moses were not called up from the grave. They weren't standing there like zombies, raggedly clothed with flesh coming off. And they were not from a place of death, but from a place of life, eternal life. And so they, the three of them, communed with each other in their eternal energy. Look, I know that sounds weird to many of us, but just think, I'm willing to bet you have experienced something like that. You might not have seen it like that, but I bet you've experienced. Have you ever been to a performance and the artist and the band or the orchestra and all who were involved, it was a night that was not like any other. It was an experience and a performance that you witnessed that just went beyond anything else you'd ever see. That this performer just had this incredible charisma and gift and talent, and they were singing or performing or playing from their authentic soul self. And what phrase do we use to describe the experience? It was like there was what? Electricity in the air. And it felt like electricity in the air if it was in a small theater, if it was in an arena or a football stadium. That particular artist had this energy, that level that was so high that you just could feel something very special was happening to you. It was like there was electricity in the air. And we all know that when we hear someone say that they didn't watch a concert in the middle of a thunderstorm. What is electricity? It's light energy, very powerful energy. See, we have a taste of it. We might not have been on the mountaintop and saw what Peter, James, and John saw, but we have experienced something maybe close to it. That we found ourselves in the presence of a human being who had so much charisma and so much energy. It was like electricity in the air. Moses and Elijah also had to go through a lot of life to be transfigured. Look at Moses. He was born a slave in Egypt from Hebrew people. And his mother puts him in a little basket and sends him down a little river where his sister is watching over him, and then the Pharaoh's daughter discovers him, and he grows up as the prince of Egypt. He grows up in the beautiful riches and wealth of royalty. But one day, he saw an Egyptian soldier abusing a Hebrew person, and he attacked the Egyptian soldier, and he killed him, and then tried to cover him up, but people knew about it, and so Moses became a fugitive. And he ran away, and he let go of that royal life that he had in the most powerful kingdom in the world. And he found himself being a sheep herder in the wilderness. And without going through the whole story, he sees a burning bush. God tells him to go free a whole nation of people, a workforce from the most powerful ruler in the world. Oh, what am I supposed to say to this guy? Just tell them that I am sent you and that he's to let my people go. Okay, that sounds easy enough. Not. So don't you find it fascinating that it was Moses who was the fugitive because he was a lawbreaker, ends up leading millions of people through a wilderness to become a lawgiver. And not only that, he spent so much time in the wilderness with an unruly people, and they could never be satisfied, and they could never, he couldn't do enough for them, only to arrive to the promised land that he did not get to enter into. Life can kind of suck that way at times. And last week I talked to you some about Elijah, who was a powerful prophet, and he made a deal with Jezebel, and a queen, and that his God is more powerful than her God Baal. And so they had a contest where they built two altars, one for Baal and one for Yahweh, one for Elohim. And so Moses has made his altar, and Elijah makes his altar and digs a moat around the altar and saturates the altar with fire. and the prophets of Baal are singing and cutting themselves and dancing and in a trance. And then in a moment's time, a great fire from heaven comes and consumes Elijah's altar. Whew, energy. And then we find out that the people then decided to react by killing all the prophets. And then we discover that Jezebel was very fond of her prophets. And so she puts a price on his head, and then he runs away to the mountain, where I talked to you about it last week. My point is that we see the end of the story sometimes without knowing all the work that had to take place before they got to that point. In this story, then we see clearly what we're not supposed to do. Let me repeat that. In the story, we see what we are not supposed to do. Peter, after experiencing this otherworldly thing that he could not explain, in fact, it was a bit frightening for him. So Peter just reacted in the best way he knew how, and that was, let's get busy building things. We'll build a booth for Moses, and we'll build a booth for Elijah, and we'll build a booth for Jesus. Let's start looking around, fellas, for some stones and some wood. Peter could not deal with what he was experiencing, so he just wants to get busy. But here's the thing. Why were they there? Peter, James, and John were not there to start a construction project. They were there, I believe, to witness something that's in them too. That they were to experience something that they did not know existed within themselves, that they too could become transfigured. They were to witness what was way beyond their ego mind. They were not there to find distractions because it was just too weird to deal with. Here again, I think many of us can relate to that. How many of us have been on a spiritual retreat, or we took some time to go hiking on a mountain, or kayaking a river, or sailing the ocean? And at some time in that hiking or spiritual retreat or sailing, we had an epiphany. It was clear as the sun shining. It was like the bells of Notre Dame ringing. And it was so outside of our realm of experience. This epiphany showed us something about who God is and about who we are and about who Jesus is. And it showed us something that we never ever thought even existed within ourselves. And we know that we've experienced something that is life-changing, only to find ourselves a few days later finding ways to get distracted and explaining it all away. When God takes us to the mountaintop to experience what our fully total alive selves are and the energy that dwells within us, God does not want us to experience it and get busy being distracted, but God wants us to take it in and to see that this transfiguration, this energy, this incredible power source is within us as well. Then the story goes where while Peter and James and John are looking for supplies to build booths, the mountaintop is covered by a cloud. And this is another very common theme in Hebrew literature and their belief systems. This is what we call a theophany, an appearance of God. God has no face like a human being. God appeared by a cloud or by fire. In fact, when Moses was leading the children of Israel through the wilderness to the promised land, God guided them in a cloud by day and fire by night. When Moses was getting the 10 Commandments, a cloud covered the mountain. This is a very common theme. So while Peter and James and John are getting busy to start a construction project, a cloud, God covers the mountain. God covers everything that is there. God covers them, and then a voice from that cloud says, "This is my Son, whom I love. Listen to him." Listen to him. And this is what I believe is the clue for us in experiencing transfiguration. Listen to Jesus. Listen to his teachings. Listen to his words. Know the stories, not just intellectually, but know them intimately. Let Jesus' teachings and his words and his experiences and his strength and his authority and his eternal energy, let it become a part of us. And from that, we learn what we must do to experience transfiguration and the fullness of who we are as God's creation. That we start to connect intimately and profoundly with our eternal energy that lives and dwells within us. "This is my Son whom I love. Listen to him." There's an exclamation point at the end of the sentence. Listen to him. And this message from God is what has been my greatest joy and light in my own spiritual path. Knowing intimately who Jesus was, what he taught has helped me in my journey toward being transfigured. And yes, there are many other sources, many other people in history, spiritual or otherwise, that have inspired me. There are many other sources on spiritual realms that inspire me. But the source for me that has taught me the most, and it has been the light of my path, have been the stories of Jesus. He shows me what it's like to be human. But not human in the sense of making an excuse for how I have come up short. Well, I'm only human. No, in that moment, you're probably something less than human. Jesus showed me what it was like in his stories, that it is indeed possible. It is indeed possible while living on this earth, while being surrounded by chaos and distractions, while being in a body that sometimes functions and sometimes it doesn't, that regardless of what's going on the material world around us and our five senses in these bodies, that there's another part of us that is just as real. And the more conscious we become of our soul self, of our eternal selves, of our energy that lives and breathes within us, that then we have that light to the path to help us to be more alive regardless of what's happening around us, you see. And that's what Jesus has done for me. This is what I have learned from him. He teaches me what I need to do to be conscious of the divine in me and make that transition from my ego mind to my full spiritual expression. And it is hard. It's the hardest thing I have ever done in my life. It is so hard. And why is it so hard, Pastor Barton? Because there are so many distractions. As I've shared with you before, we have to create a time and a place for solitude to listen and to hear the question, what are you doing here? And then know the answers and have clarity about them. It's hard because there are so many distractions. And Jesus sought solitude from the distractions to know who and what he was to do and who he was to be. Can't I just take a pill? Don't you just have a superpower for prayer to make it all go away? Look, if you live long enough on this earth, you'll witness an athlete who has achieved something athletically that no one else has done. And And, Olympians, the gold medalist is the best at that event of all the athletes in the world. I can't even imagine being the best at something in the world. Or scientists who are able to see outside of the box and the limitations, and they discover there's energy and there's things in the world all around us, and they're able to somehow see something and then harness that energy and take what no one else can see and bring it together to invent something or to create something that changes the world. Right? To make it more relevant, COVID-19 is ravaging the world. Millions have had it, millions have been sick, and millions are dying from it. In our own country, there's predicted that we'll have maybe 600,000 deaths in our own country before the vaccines start taking hold and we get the herd immunity so that it no longer ravages us. And within a period of what? 9 months? These scientists have created vaccines that can be anywhere from 70 to 95% effective against this horrible, powerful virus. And we celebrate that and we're in awe of that. But here's the thing. When we see the athlete who's done that incredible athletic thing, when we experience the scientist who's invented something that changes the world, when we get our vaccines and next year we're no longer living in shelter in place and we no longer have to be afraid to touch each other, what we see is the end result. What we haven't seen is all that took place before that, right? For that athlete to be the best in the world at something, we don't see all the days of training and work and dreaming and commitment and perseverance and all the things that they had to do. They were knocked down, they got back up. For the scientists, we don't see the life that they had before they became a famous scientist, where they were always dreaming in the cloud and people were pounding them in the head, get your head out of the clouds and just do something normal and live in the real world, you see? And for those scientists who've created these vaccines, we don't know all the years that they spent studying, experimenting, watching, observing, taking data, observing data. Yet we don't see all the work behind it. And so, yes, Peter, James, and John got to see Jesus, and Moses, and Elijah transfigured, but they didn't see all that took place before they got to that point. And I believe that this is the point of the story. As we don't go around being distracted and avoiding this incredible revelation before our eyes and this epiphany and find a way to explain it away, but rather we see it and we take it in and know that that's in us too. What do I need to do to get there? I read the story about the great golfer Gary Player, that he was in a tournament and he had a putt that no one expected him to make. It was just one of those things. The green is undulating and changing, and the ball would have to go a serpentine route or what to get to the hole. The best you hope to do was get it within 3 feet. And lo and behold, he made that putt. And one of his competitors looked at him and said, "Lucky putt." And Gary Player said this: "The harder I practice, the luckier I get." That applies not only in golf, but that applies in life. The more you practice, the more you read, the more you listen, the more intimate you become with the teachings and the stories of Jesus or what other spiritual sources you have, the more you study and give your time and your energy to that, then the more profound your life is going to be. I created a sculpture in our sanctuary called the Dance of Transcendence. And it's one of the hardest things that I've ever created with my hands. And in the summer of 2015, in the beginning of my sabbatical, I thought that this was going to be something I was going to finish in a couple of months. I ended up working on it for 1.5 years. I worked on it well over a year, after my sabbatical was over. So I continued to work on it while I was working full-time serving my congregation, and by being a stepdad and a husband and having a life and home and taking care of all the responsibilities and the needs all around me. And yet I continued to work on it. And there were so many times during that process of creating the sculpture that I was just done with it. I want it to be done, right? I'm over it. But I see what I need to do on the feet and the toes and to create the veins in the top of the foot. And I see what I need to do to create that sense of there's bone and ankles underneath the flesh, and to see how the legs and the muscles work. I see what has to happen in the torso and what goes on in the arms and the hands. And I see what has to happen in the neck as his head is turned and his fingers. And I see all of these things and I think, oh my gosh, I'm never going to finish this. I'm just going to look for some shortcuts. Maybe I'll just do an impressionistic version of it, and let's just get it over with. And even as I was tempted to build booths on the Mount of Transfiguration, the voice in my head says, go all the way. Give this your absolute best. And I decided that regardless of how long it's going to take, I'm going to complete it fully. I knew that I had an opportunity to create a statue or to create a work of art that could inspire people. And if I take shortcuts, it'd just be a big hunk of bronze used as a decoration. But if I give it my heart, my soul, my sweat, my blood, my tears, and I give it my whole set, that when people look at it, maybe some will be inspired by it because they intuitively can feel that, you see. And that experience of creating the sculpture, it showed me that I had a level of excellence within my person that I did not know existed before. And it was hard, and it was disappointing when it fell apart, and I had to do it over again, and it fell apart again. It was so hard, and I wanted to give up, but I did not, because I knew that there was something in me that had to finish this project that had been with me for over 20 years, and I needed to be my absolute very, very best. I will do the work until it's complete. And what I'm trying to convey to you this morning in your lives, do your work until your life is complete. Live in aliveness. Don't be saints of mediocrity. Don't settle for the shortcut. And when you see and experience an epiphany and something beyond time and space and what we're familiar with, don't be frightened by it, but know that that experience that you've witnessed is revealing to you that this incredible light and energy and power and love of God is in you too. What are we doing here? It seems like a great question. Maybe write it down or put a big font on a piece of paper and tape it to your mirror. And when you're washing your hands and your face in the morning, you look up and answer that question, what are you doing here? Can't I just take a pill? Don't you have a special prayer that would just make it all go away? You know, if I did have that pill, and if I did have that Harry Potter magic formula spell, I could say to make it all go away, I wouldn't give it away. I wouldn't do it. Why? If we clip the cocoon of the butterfly to make it easier for it to emerge, then what we discover is that lovely, peaceful creature does not have the strength to fly. Becoming the fullest expression of ourselves is a difficult path, but it is the difficulty, and it is the commitment, and it is overcoming. It's the successes, it's the failures, it's being knocked down, it's the getting back up that gives us the strength to what? To fly. The reward is great. We come closer to living in oneness with God when we choose this path. We experience aliveness. And who knows, maybe someday in the future, we will have a conversation with Jesus on a mountaintop with some of his disciples close by, radiating from our fullest eternal energy selves. It could happen. Thus ends the lesson.